Welcome to Deadline TV. Today's guest is Greg Stejskal, a retired FBI agent who was with the Bureau for 31 years, finished his career in Ann Arbor as head of the Ann Arbor office. He's also the author of FBI Case Files, Michigan, Tales of a G-Man. And today we'll be talking about the Whitmer kidnap case. Welcome. Welcome, Greg.
Good to be here.
Thanks for doing this. So, the case, you followed the case. Did you have any concerns that, okay, this looks more problematic or more of a challenging case than we realized, or did you feel like it was a slam dunk for the government?
Well, first of all, and that's interesting you use that terminology because we used to hear it all the time. Uh, if you're going to trial in front of a jury, there is no such thing as a slam dunk.
Right.
Probably a more appropriate basketball analogy would be a jump ball because juries notoriously do strange things.
Mhm. And so, what was were there any red flags during any of this time as you were watching it, going, oh, we had some of the agents who were getting in trouble. We had obviously the defense kept raising the issue of entrapment, trying to get the case dismissed. Where were you at on that? Were you still confident the government was on solid ground, or?
Well, I was confident the government was on solid ground. I mean, entrapment is a very limited defense, and it seemed to me from the onset of the trial, well, the onset of the investigation, that entrapment would not hold up as a defense.
Mhm.
That being said, there of course there were the red flags of some uh, apparent inappropriate and in one case criminal activity by a couple of the agents involved in the case.
Mhm.
Um, but those seemed ancillary to the actual trial. There was a tremendous amount of recorded conversations and messages that were encrypted text messages between the conspirators that led me to believe that the government case was pretty strong.
Now, you were with the Bureau, obviously, for a long time, and during that 31 years, I'm sure you saw some cases. We saw the Wolverine golf course case that blew up in the government's face. We saw, the government normally wins the majority, the lion's share of their cases, but occasionally on the really big cases, they lose them. How embarrassing is that, or is that just like part of the territory?
No, yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as being embarrassing. You learn lessons when you lose cases. There was a famous case involving DeLorean uh, uh, quite a while back,
Hmm.
and that in that case he raised the defense of entrapment successfully because it did appear that the agent that was dealing with the undercover agent that was dealing with DeLorean actually suggested to him the crime that he ultimately was charged with, and that was the sale of cocaine to raise money and as a means to raise money. And they challenged it, and in trial they won. And the bureau learned a lot of lessons from that, and that was that you try to the best of your ability, you record every conversation between an undercover agent and in this case both the undercover agents and what we would term as cooperating witnesses. They're not, by bureau terminology, these people were not informants, they were cooperating witnesses.
No, it's as your experience, I'm sure, has shown, these kind of guys are not that hard to like penetrate their organizations as opposed to some of the more, tighter groups. They seem very desperate to bring people in. Uh, they're also not always the most sophisticated. Do you think that when they're not when defendants are not that sophisticated and they're going up against a pretty sophisticated government, do they get some sympathy points from the jury uh, that they've been taken advantage of, or which?
seemed to be the case in this case that they did, in fact, get some sympathy from the jury. It would seem, rather than the entrapment defense being successful, it would seem more to me that the stupidity defense was successful, in
Okay.
that the defense argued that these guys were. I don't know that they actually characterized them as not being very smart, but they certainly characterized them as being not sophisticated. They were big mouths. They were oftentimes under the influence of alcohol and or marijuana, and so they said that they had no intention of carrying out these things that they talked about.
What was your impression? Did you get an impression this was a pretty serious plot, or do you think it was a lot of bravado by guys who were just trying to be machismo and vent anger?
Um, Certainly there was. They did indicate that they had an interest in doing harm to the governor, and it had sort of coalesced into a plan. I use the term plan loosely, to kidnap the governor, and uh, the main cooperating witness, saw this and decided that these guys were, because of a number of statements they had made, that they were serious about carrying this out.
Now, two of there's a mistrial, and the government's going to go after Adam Fox and Barry Croft. The two other guys, Daniel Harris and Brandon Concerta, are off. What do you take away from that when two guys are just outright acquitted on the charges? What do you read into that?
Well, I think it was clear that those two were the lesser two involved in the alleged conspiracy, and that they were sort of following along. And it isn't clear uh, from what, at least what I'm aware of, as their statements and everything, that they were fully on board, or that they even were willing to follow through with this. They certainly weren't involved in some of the activities. Consequently, um, I can see where the jury might decide that um, they were not part of the conspiracy.
Now, the second trial, if apparently they're planning to go ahead and retry Fox and Croft, whose advantage is it at this point for the defense or the prosecution to get a second bite of the apple? Uh, I mean, obviously the defense doesn't want to go back in there, but who's got a better sense of where the case is going to go?
Well, and I don't think you can say generally speaking on all cases, but in this particular case, since the the government, I think, is going to have a better feel where the sympathies may lie, and where some of the weaknesses in their case, things that they need to emphasize. So consequently, it's difficult to know for sure, but I would say in this case that it might favor the prosecution.
Okay. So the prosecution will do what? Will they figure out where they went wrong, or will they look for more witnesses? Will they do more investigation before the next trial? How does that end up working?
Yeah, I think all of the above.
Uh,
I think first of all, you have to be aware of where there may have been some problems, and I think that they will make an effort to clarify. I don't know if the jurors in this case have been interviewed. I don't even know what the polling numbers were. I mean, the way our system works, the way the criminal justice system works, juries have to be unanimous. So was the vote, 11-1 for conviction, 11-2, or 10-2 for conviction, or was it the other way around? I don't really know. And the same goes for acquittals; they have to be unanimous. So If the prosecution has an opportunity or had an opportunity to interview the jurors, that would be very helpful in knowing where their message was not clear to the jury.
And let me ask you, the whole plot was so crazy. I think when it finally came out, it was just people were like so baffled by it. Do you think we saw a lot of fighting going on between Trump and Whitmer, Trump and Dana Nessel? There was a lot of Trump was pushing back on some of the COVID restrictions here in Michigan, blaming Whitmer. Do you think any of that contributed to this sort of crazy idea of let's take out the governor?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the the climate uh, at that time, and maybe for most of the Trump administration during that period of time, up until and through the 2020 election, there was a climate of I would almost say acceptance of some of the extreme right positions, um, and they felt, I think, at least in my perception, that a lot of these right wing groups felt empowered, entitled by some of the things that the president said.
And one last thing, when the FBI, like a case like this, do the FBI agents have a say in whether to retry it? Do they go to the prosecutor and they sit down and the FBI agents say we better go after him? Do they have a lot of input in the final decision?
The FBI, at least in my experience, when I did go to trial, we definitely have a big input with the U.S. attorney and with the prosecuting attorneys, the assistant U.S. attorneys
Okay,
generally,
okay,
and uh, and yeah, our opinion and I think it will be looked at to see whether or not there's evidence that we could have used in the last trial and didn't, things that maybe we need to emphasize. And so, yes, the FBI definitely has input in the decision uh, all along the way,
okay,
whether it be in the grand jury for the indictment or all the way through.
okay. Okay. Well, Greg, thanks so much for taking the time out on Deadline TV. Really appreciate it. It's always good seeing you. And thanks again.